Hello, I'm Alina Polyakova, President and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA. Welcome to the 2023 CEPA Forum, Winning the War, Winning the Peace. It is my honor, on behalf of CEPA, to present our Transatlantic Leadership Award to Senator from Kentucky, Senate Minority Leader, the Honorable Mitch McConnell, for his steadfast leadership and support for Ukraine. Senator, it's such a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for accepting our award and for everything you've done to ensure consistent U.S. support for Ukraine.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to receive the award and happy to see you again. I think we met in Munich, and I remember you were speaking up, and I remember saying, I totally agree with what I just heard.
Well, part of that conversation that we had back then, goes into what we want to talk about today. You have been on the floor of the Senate making the case for why it's in the U.S. vital interest to support Ukraine. But of course, we've seen some of the public opinion numbers over the last years and year and a half since Russia's full-scale invasion. We are seeing some decline in support, especially among the U.S. public. So, Senator, let's just get into it. Why do you think it's in the U.S. vital interest to make sure that Ukraine wins this war against Russia?
I think it's an easy call. We're lined up here against China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. That ought to tell you right from the beginning that you're on the right side. Second, we're not losing any American military personnel. The Ukrainians are doing the fighting themselves. As a result of the weapons transfers that we've made to Ukraine, we're reindustrializing our base here in the United States and employing a significant number of Americans, people in this country, building our industrial base again. I think it's an easy call. In the context of our GDP, it's a really small fraction that we're providing for this effort in Ukraine. If Putin is to win this, some NATO country will be next, and I think it's a lot smarter to stop this invasion, to push him back, and the only personnel prepared to engage in that are Ukrainians themselves who've been courageous and committed. And I think it's an inspiration to the rest of the world that actually elects their leaders and doesn't have autocrats running the countries.
And Senator, I know you have had the opportunity to go to Ukraine in May of last year. Of course, President Zelensky also spoke to a joint session of Congress last year as well. And President Zelensky was just in Washington this last week. In terms of making the case to the American people, one thing you said I want to follow up on, that's the relationship between our support for Ukraine as the United States government and the military-industrial base. Can you expand on that a little bit? How does supporting Ukraine actually support U.S. jobs in the military-industrial complex? Because we've heard a lot about that, and I just want to hear your take.
As we ship weapons and ammunition to the Ukrainians, we rebuild those in many instances with more modern, cutting-edge equipment. And we need to be rebuilding our industrial base anyway, wholly aside from the Ukraine war, because of the rising competition from Russia and China. There are some Americans who say, well, this is a long way from the Far East, and that's where our real concerns are. Well, the Prime Minister of Japan said if you want to send President Xi a message, beat Putin in Ukraine. The South Koreans are concerned. The Filipinos are concerned. The Australians are concerned. So it does have a huge impact on Asia and the future of Taiwan.
I mean, this is really a test of the future of U.S. global leadership, isn't it, when it comes down to it, that if we win in Ukraine, that will secure U.S. global leadership for the long term. And if we allow Russia to defeat Ukraine or to accomplish something that President Putin can call a win, that'll be detrimental to the future of U.S. leadership, not just in Europe, but in the Indo-Pacific and across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up taking a holiday from history after the Berlin Wall came down. The Germans basically signed up with the Russians for their energy. Yeah. And I think we all acted as if evil had somehow stopped. Well, I can remember I was not old enough, but my dad told me after he got back from fighting in Europe of the fear they had in what is now the Czech Republic of the Russians. Mm-hmm. That's where they met the Russians at the end of the war. Mm-hmm. And he was a regular foot soldier. He wrote my mother a letter saying, I think we're going to have a problem with the Russians. And after a brief period, after Yeltsin, I think we thought this was a country that was going to act differently. President Bush and President Obama tried to treat Putin as a sort of normal leader. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty clear that the path is very similar to the old Soviet Union, and they've got to be stopped.
Well, let me stick with that point because, of course, in many ways, what Putin is doing now is very much in line with centuries of Russian history and Russian imperialism and the desire to really base Russian identity on control of territory and territories that the people who live in those territories don't want to be part of that empire. And I think that's what we're seeing in the kind of courage that you're describing among Ukrainians now. They're making very clear they want to be part of the West. They want to be allied first and foremost with the United States. They don't want to be part of the Russian Empire. And I think it behooves us as a democratic society, as you've said before, to support them. But let me just go back to the rising skepticism we see, not just among the American people who, by the way, when they're given information about the low cost and the bang for the buck we're getting by supporting Ukraine, as you described, do change their minds about support. There's been some polling to show that. But also in the US Congress. I mean, it's no secret that many, both on the Republican side and also some on the other side, are skeptics. And some are even advocating to cut support for Ukraine at this really critical juncture in the war. What will be the cost of doing that? What will be the cost of pulling the plug on support?
Well, the reason Republican support is declining is the opposition of the former president. That's the bad news. The good news is the leadership here in Congress of armed services and foreign relations and intelligence, appropriations, are still very much in this camp of supporting the Ukrainians. I think the American people are being, to some extent, misled. I don't think they understand the facts. And what I try to do for whatever audience I have is just tell the truth. Mm-hmm. No American's getting killed. We're replenishing our industrial base and hiring people in, I think, over 30 states in the process of rebuilding our defense. It is very much related to Asia, and the two biggest big power adversaries we have now are Russia and China, and so I believe that repeating the facts hopefully will sustain the position of support.
So on your point about the vision for victory. There are certainly critics out there, and you've been one of them, of the Biden administration's policy towards Ukraine, that it's, as you've said previously, there's been undecisive, and that it should be up to Congress to be more decisive and not to repeat that policy failure. So what would you like to see the United States do now at this moment to support Ukraine towards winning that we haven't yet done?
Well, my big criticism of the president is, he's not aggressive enough. I think they make an announcement about a weapons transfer, and you read the fine print and you find out it won't be there for 6 months or a year. So I basically am aligned with the administration, but I think the president has done a poor job of delivering the weapon support on time and making the argument to the American people. Nobody has a bigger audience than whoever's president. And here you have the current president with a big audience and the former president with a big audience. And it's no wonder the former president has more influence on Republicans. Not surprising.
So I think we all would love to see President Biden make the case to the American people and use his broad appeal and loud voice to do that. He's done that in Poland, but he hasn't done that in the United States for quite some time. And I think that's something that all of us would like to see more of, to your point on leadership and what that looks like. Let me just wrap up with one last question. You alluded to the link between what's happening in Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific. I think to a lot of people, it's not clear. How does it matter that if we support Ukraine, how will that really affect our greatest long-term strategic competitor and adversary, which is, of course, China? Can you make that connection clear? What is the link between supporting Ukraine and our security in the Indo-Pacific and our ability to deter China?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I think the people most frightened about East Asia are countries that are actually there. Prime Minister of Japan, President of Korea are deeply concerned about this, and they are right next door to China. I think they know more about the threat from China related to the Russian war in Ukraine than we do. I don't think they're making this up. They're sending money, they're sending equipment to a different part of the world because they think it's directly related to President Xi and China's aspirations in the region.
And of course, we see a situation on the other side where countries like Iran, North Korea, China are all in various ways supporting Russia. Right? So we're really, I think, seeing the emergence of this authoritarian alliance. Once again, as you said, we took a break from history, but history has returned to bite us in a very, very painful and significant way. So Senator, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving us the honor to honor you for your voice and steadfast support for Ukraine. I know you have a very busy time ahead these next couple of weeks, and we from CEPA wish you all the luck and certainly hope that we will come out in a positive way, not just for Americans, but for all the Ukrainians that are losing their lives every day, fighting for freedom, liberty, and democracy. Thank you very much for your time and for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in into the 2023 CEPA Forum Transatlantic Leadership Award conversation with Senator Mitch McConnell, CEPA's 2023 honoree. Please remember to tune into our website, cepa.org, that's cepa.org. Follow us on social, #CEPA Forum, YouTube, X, LinkedIn, wherever you get your news. Thank you very much and stay tuned.